In a complete mold inspection, the inspector shall perform a non-invasive visual examination of the readily accessible, visible, and installed systems and components of the building listed in the IEC 2 Mold Inspection Standards of Practice. The inspector shall also perform moisture, temperature, and humidity measurements, at least 3 air samples, 2 outdoor, 1 indoor, and possibly 1 surface sampling at an area of concern. The inspector shall report moisture intrusion, water damage, musty odors, apparent mold growth, and conditions conducive to mold growth. The inspector shall report any system or component listed in the standards of practice that were not visually examined and the reasons they were not inspected. So let's do an examination of a home. I'd like to start with the roof. It's at your discretion. I walk the roofs if I can. You do not have to. You are not required to walk upon a roof to perform a mold inspection. The condition of this roof is in good shape from afar, taking digital pictures, but when you look up close, in some areas, we have defects. These are staples popping up through the shingle tabs. These are all holes, essentially, moisture intrusion, paths for water to penetrate through. It's no longer water resistant. The gutters are filled with debris. There's debris on the roof, so it's not draining properly. That's a condition conducive to moisture intrusion. Take a look at the ventilation and the flashing. Vent pipes and penetrations through the roof. The flashing around it needs to be in good shape. The gutter guards are collapsed, so there are guards installed, screens, but they're not functioning. More staples popping through. And inspect all of the vent pipes that come through, all the flashing, and try to take pictures. I like pictures of the gutter systems. There's moss, which could indicate moisture, damp areas underneath that roof area, or just as shady. Skylights are prone to water penetration. They have a history of problems, even if they're installed properly. So take a look at the flashing around there, and also the chimney stack. General condition of the crown shouldn't be opened up to allow moisture down the chimney. And the flashing areas need to be inspected. This one's opened up, needs to be repaired, prone to moisture intrusion. Copper counter flashing seems to be okay. It's sealed here and there. The gap needs to be sealed. On the ground, the exterior and grounds, the Pachysandra is an inspection restriction. The vegetation, can't really see where the downspouts are going. Take a look at the siding, the windows, shutters, the casing. This one is loose, prone to moisture intrusion. The masonry brick is in really good shape. And check anything that comes out through the siding material, like this sump pump pipe. Follow it. Any vents, so we know we have a crawl space. Exterior seems to be sloped away, but there's so much vegetation up against the house. Could be retaining moisture there. So look up, look down. There's the underground drainage pipes. Check out the windows as you wrap around the house. AC unit, through wall AC units sometimes leak. Where different materials meet, it should be sealed up. Be careful, that's an live electric line hanging by your foot. So look up at the exposed wood and the gutters. Those are spilling over. We have an HVAC system, 2 of them, so we're going to inspect those and air sample those. There's the steel doors to the basement. They're in poor shape. Should be maintained. We got some open gaps and holes, rust holes, to allow water penetration. And there's the dryer vent pipe. We'll inspect that on the inside. And take a look at the doors. The treads sometimes leak, and the electric meters. Give them a shake. Sometimes the electric meters are loose and allow water to penetrate behind them, and follow the electric lines. That area should be sealed. Underground drainage systems, don't worry about those. Can't see underground. Just report what you can see visually, and the driveway seems to be in good shape. The rest of the grading, I'm not sure about that stone wall there. May have been installed to divert something away. We're in the crawl space now. Taking a look at the wood structure, there's the food and nutrients for mold. No apparent mold, no moisture intrusion yet, if any. Be careful, wear PPE. Follow the sewer line that goes through the foundation. Sometimes water comes back through that hole if it's not sealed like that one. The sewer line's there, the copper sewer line's coming through. Follow the main structural beams, especially where they end in a pocket in the foundation. No signs of water on the floor, no flooding. There were some musty odors though, so I'm looking for plumbing leaks, and here's one here, which is beneath a master shower, tiled shower. So the floor, that yellow stuff there is apparent mold growth. So I report that, and we should sample that, and there's efflorescence coming through this foundation wall. Now we have moisture intrusion coming from the ground outside and from a plumbing leak, and we have apparent mold growth. There's some yellow stuff, some green stuff, some fuzzy stuff. So initially it didn't seem that bad, but now we have apparent stuff, now areas of concern. Follow the sewer lines. It's cast iron 1, copper. Follow the water supply lines as well. It's trapped there with some green stuff on the wood. In the basement now, out of the crawl space, we have obvious moisture intrusion just coming right through the concrete block wall. Water marks at the bottom corners of the basement. Somebody tried to put tape there to stop the water. Sump pump dehumidifier is actually draining into the sump. The boiler has a lot of things to inspect for water. The TPR valve, expansion tank, air valves, fittings, hot water source there. Take a look at the bottom to see if there are any water stains or marks. Hot water source has TPR valve. Sometimes they drip. There's a valve problem there, water shutoff valve. The bladder tanks, sometimes they produce condensate. Vent flue pipes of combustion appliances can bring humidity and condensation into a room if it's not venting properly. Follow the supply lines coming in with the water shutoff valve. Sometimes they drip. There's a lot of condensation produced on cold water that's in a well bladder tank. Look at the fittings and the valves. There's some black stuff that could be cleaned up there. Air handler in the attic. And apparent mold growth. Lots of it. Apparent mold growth. Lots of it. So I'm going to look for structural water damage now. Don't see any really. The rest of it looks pretty good. Not sure what caused that apparent mold growth. We'll sample it though, just to confirm. Air handler has a water catch pan. It should not be filled with water. There's some water stains there on structural components. The HVAC system has not been maintained. Delayed maintenance at the system is a condition conducive to mold growth. The filters are filthy. And there's that shower with the water problem beneath. Looks okay, pushing on the tiles, but apparently has caused some apparent mold growth in the crawl space below. Run water and then I'll go back down in the crawl space with my moisture meter. Run all the water at all the fixtures, anything that has water supplied to it, hot and cold water, bathroom tubs, showers. And if there's a plumbing access panel and you can open it up, sometimes there are water stains like this. And on the interior, general look around, you're looking for stains on the walls, mold, water damage, condensation on the windows. There's the half bath. Toilet and sink. Below the sink, look at the valves and any window in a bathroom. Laundry produces a lot of humidity and condensation. Sometimes there's water leaks at the valves and hoses. Behind the laundry is a good place to look for mold growth, and it needs to vent outside. We saw that previously. And at the kitchen, run the sink and the garbage disposal and the dishwasher. Make sure it drains. and the ventilation system over the stove. And the refrigerator is missing. Looks like there was something on the wall there they wiped up. An attached garage is a room of the residential home. It's not an outdoor detached room. You can't use it as an outdoor sampling area. It's an attached room of the house. So don't take an air sample in the garage as a garage sample. So in summary, we have defects on the roof that could cause water intrusion and conducive to mold growth. Clogged gutters need to be attended to. The open flashing at the chimney. There's a leak from the shower causing apparent mold growth. There's apparent mold growth all over the wood floor structure in the crawl space. In the basement, there's moisture intrusion through the wall. In the attic, there's a large amount of apparent mold growth. And the HVAC system needs to be maintained. And there are watermarks behind the plumbing access panel. 2 air samples outside we're going to take. Do a visual examination. We have a bunch of moisture intrusion, musty odors, apparent mold growth, and conditions. Take air samples inside, used for comparison. Take surface samples, used for confirmation. Let's do another one. This is a townhouse. Go up on the roof. It's a little slippery because it's in the morning, so be careful. You're not required to walk on the roof. The condition is in good shape. No staples popping out, no nails, nothing cracked or damaged. Report a roof that is in poor condition because that's conducive to mold growth, moisture intrusion. Had a concern about all the watermarks and stains and patches on the chimney stack. Don't want water traveling down that chimney stack into the building interior. Take a look at the caps, just divert water away. Take a look at the flashing. The counter flashing seems good. It's tight. Nothing missing or open. Some sealant there. There's a little piece of step flashing sticking out. That's good. A lot of patching. Ventilation for the attic. There's a ridge vent. And where the house meets the neighbor's house, there's some step flashing. And at the wall intersection, there's any penetration that comes through the roof should be inspected for flashing problems. And the gutters as well. You need clean gutters like this one in the back. This one at the corner, the one in the front starting to fill up. As we come down, take a look at the windows, the downspouts. They should be diverting water away. There's water damage here at this fake window shutter. I'm walking on the deck and looking at the capping above. We have an HVAC system, so we're going to sample that. Here's the deck that was just on. Shouldn't have been walking on it because it has major structural damage, water damage. Not really concerned about the mold growth here because it's on the outside, but since I'm looking for water damage, I'll report it. The beam is a structural defect, material defect. Could cause harm to people if we're all out on the deck. Deck was unsafe actually. HVAC system is conducive to mold growth if it is like this, delayed maintenance with a dirty air filter, and we're going to sample that apparent mold growth. It's white, and that mold growth, it's black and white. It's all apparent until you sample. Follow the condensate line. Sometimes that's overflowing. Hot water source should be inspected. They're coming in. There's water leaking in this area. The valves are leaking down the wall and possibly in the wall cavity. At all the bathrooms, flush the toilets, the tubs, the sinks, the showers, run hot and cold water. Look at the valves by the toilets and underneath the sinks, in the cabinets, up in the attic. Not finding too much. No moisture intrusion. No water damage. Except we have a dryer that's exhausting into the attic space. A ton of moisture. Now we have a lot of moisture intrusion. Condensation problems could develop from that dryer. And lint. Fire hazard, actually. The interior, take a look around. We're looking for patching, paint. The chimney. I want to make sure there isn't any water dripping down because we had that concern with the stucco on the outside. run the water at the kitchen sink and appliances. The cabinet had some prior damage. Run the dishwasher. So, in summary, we take 2 outdoor air samples when we arrive, do a visual examination, and we found areas of concern: moisture intrusion, water damage, apparent mold growth. We have those conditions conducive to mold growth. We take some surface samples used for confirmation, and interior air samples used for comparison. Nachi TV has invited Dr. Shane to be part of our online video course. Dr. Shane, thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
You are the chief mycologist at ProLab.
I am.
And you got a BS at BYU in botany.
Correct.
And you're the former senior
Aerobiologist at MLab P&K, and took my PhD at Arizona State in the microbiology botany department.
And today you have brought with us in the studio here a whole table full of sampling devices. You're going to teach us how to do the sampling that a mold inspector should use. And would a normal average mold inspector be carrying all these tools, or is there more?
This is a representative sample of what a sampling kit ought to look like for a mold inspector. We're going to go through and talk about each one of these and detail how they work and why they're used, so that they understand how to take a mold sample.
Where do you want to start first? Which one?
Well, let me just give you an overview of this,
okay,
so that we understand what these things are on the table, and then we'll detail them as we go. And in no particular order, one of the most important things is the chain of custody. We're going to talk about that in detail, but the chain of custody is a legal document, and it needs to be filled out properly and completely to make your efforts at the home or the building fruitful, to make the lab able to interpret your sampling and make the reports seamless.
Now,
so
this document is usually provided by the laboratory.
You can get them from the laboratory, either download them or they send them in packets for sampling.
Because they're in a format where the laboratory needs to recognize the information quickly. The people handling the things, the dates. So I know this one is from ProLab, and I've seen this before. So you can download this, as you just said, from ProLab's website. And you get the chain of custody form, which is a legal document that needs to be filled out. Otherwise, sampling is just meaningless to the lab. You can't just send things in without this.
That's correct. A lot of the problems with the chain of custody are when they're not filled out, the sampling date's not there, serial numbers are not there, flow rates are not there,
yeah,
and we can't guess.
Yeah. What if samples are sent to the lab without this chain of custody form?
Well, if we have, and it does happen that we don't know who they come from, but oftentimes we have a business card that's in the packet. We'll have to call the inspector and find out what the sampling parameters were, and if the samples can be salvaged, we salvage them. And
what if the inspector doesn't keep a copy of this or loses this information? He should be writing information down somewhere else as well, or this is the main important document that is needed, is necessary?
The chain of custody has got to accompany the samples. There's no two ways about it. You're walking on thin ice if they don't.
Yeah.
It's so hard to reconstruct events, and if you're ever litigated, they're going to look straight at the chain of custody first, and if there's irregularities, the whole sampling regime will be called into question.
Yeah. Okay. What's next?
Well, what you see, we've got a sampling pump, a Maglite pump here. We've got some viable sampling devices. We have some slit impactors, tape lifts here and here, carpet sample, allergen sample, swabs, devices to take a wall sample, and packets to send them in, and not to be minimized, a Sharpie, a good ballpoint pen, and some kind of a data record that you can record some of the information that's not on the chain of custody. For instance, like the flow rate and for the pump and the date that you calibrated it. And over here you see a stand, a tripod stand with a sample setup. That's a typical setup for a Z5, Micro 5, Allergenco, D, Aerocell, just to keep it off the ground and to put it at a breathable height to take a sample.
And we have a piece of drywall down there. We're going to do an example of a wall sample going through a wall.
That's correct.
Okay.
So what we probably ought to do is let's talk first about the chain of custody in detail, and if we could get a close-up on the chain of custody and talk about it, that would be good. There are two chain of custodies I brought today. One for the allergen samples, which are these, and we'll talk about how that's done. But what we want to talk about right now is the chain of custody for samples, all the rest of the samples except for the allergen samples. And there are places in here to put your name, payment information, but some of the important things are the address where it was sampled. That's really important. That way we have a place to, a way to fill it out for the report. The sample type, turnaround time, some environmental factors which can become important when you start to try to interpret your data, like wind speed, snow cover, raining, not raining, relative humidity. And then, of course, the important part of where the samples are recorded. You can see there's a sample number, and you can often fill in either the sample number. A lot of people put in the serial number of the cassette, which is preferable, because then you can match up a cassette with a sample, a locality, flow rate and time, and then what you want done with that. If you want it, if it's an air sample, or if you want it cultured, if it's a bulk sample or a swab sample, or if you want a species identification, all these things are on the chain of custody. There's also a place to release the chain of custody and to date it, and that ought to happen every time. You got to remember that this is a really important document. I can tell you that from my experiences in court, when the chain of custody, when there's a problem with the chain of custody, it stops everything. It just calls into question the credibility of the lab, the credibility of the sampler, and it minimizes the inspection process, which took a lot of time and energy and sometimes money to get. So the chain of custody should take the time to know it, should take the time to fill it out correctly, and to sign it and date it so the lab can expedite your samples without any problem.
When I was a lead hazard risk assessor, I was certified to do that, and this was an important document, and it really saved me in a couple instances because I had a record. It was a legal document. I was able to prove and identify, show like a chain of actions that I took, and it's amazing how pressured an inspector can be, maybe by their client during an inspection, to kind of do the recording as quick as possible, maybe take a couple samples at the same time, and kind of lose track about which sample is which. And the far left side, I see the serial number for each sample needs to be unique for that sample. The Aerocell has a number, and it should be recorded individually. Is that right? Each sample is unique and uniquely identified.
That's correct, and we'll see a close-up of these samplers. They do have serial numbers, and it's always good to write the serial number down at the sample location. You said something that's really important. Take the time to fill this out correctly. In fact, pre-fill out as much as you can before you go in to actually do the sampling, because this information up here, since you know it, it's your own name and your own company and the location that you're at, is sometimes overlooked. We'll get chain of custodies without the location where you sampled, or it'll be scribbled quickly, and penmanship counts. It's always helpful for the lab to have neat, clear, legible printing.
Yeah. Yep.
The rest of this is for the lab to internally where we accept it or reject it. We, according to AIHA, we are an AIHA certified lab. It's important that we look, and we will evaluate each sample as it comes in, and we accept or reject that sample based on whether it's broken or whether there's something, a problem with it. We'll accept or reject that sample.
Yeah. And this is for all the samples that we have here, except for, are these the allergens, the carpet samples? This is a different form for those?
Yeah, these are the allergen samples, and that's for that chain of custody.
Okay.
One of the challenges of a chain of custody is that you want to minimize the number of paper forms that a home inspector has to deal with. And you want to get all the information on a form, and you want to make it big enough for people that are over 25 can read it. And that's a real challenge. So some of the type is a little bit small, but the challenge is to make it clear and straightforward with enough information to fill it out completely so that the lab can analyze the sample.
Great.
So let's talk about a couple of these things. I have brought some air samples, and let's talk about those first. The idea behind an air sample is that it's going to look at biologics in the air. And remember, it's important to understand that in the air is literally, we're swimming in a sea of bacteria, fungi, fibers, insect parts, dust of all kinds. We're literally swimming in this sea of contamination, if you will. And it's in, so what we want to do is we want to draw out those things out of the air, capture them here efficiently, and in a way that you can analyze that quickly and economically. It's important to understand that all samples have drawbacks, all samplers. There's not a single sample device on the market that is perfect. So you have to live with imperfection. You know, biologists learn to live with imperfection all the time because it's an imperfect system. And so we don't capture 100% of the particles in the air. We don't identify 100% of the particles because they can't be known. And there are so many particles in the air, not all of them are relevant at this time, as far as we know, to human health. But every sampler tells a story. And I think that's an important idea to get across, is that when you take a sample, you're taking a snapshot in time of the environment. And it all tells a story. You can tell so much about an environment just from taking an air sample. And we don't utilize all that information, but a savvy lab will understand the background and be able to interpret the biologicals based on that background. Because we're swimming in this sea of biologics and particles, and we're going to indiscriminately sample those, we're going to have to decide how long of a sample to take. And fortunately, the manufacturers have decided where that cut point is and where the time is that we should sample. But also, a lot of people will take shorter sampling times, especially with an aerosol, than is recommended. 15 and 5 is what's recommended, but many people will take a sample time, will only take 75 liters instead of 150 liters because the background, because in their experience, backgrounds outside in certain times of the year get so high that it clouds the spores. So sampling is a lot science, but it's a lot art.
And inspectors are coming in and taking a sample literally for minutes. Unlike a radon sample, which is days, or if you get a long-term test, it's a whole year. We're going in very quickly, taking a sample of that particular time at that day, at that time, and taking that sample. Right? It's only for a few minutes that the sample is being performed.
That's right, and therein lies some of the problem. We're taking a snapshot in time for 10 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, and because imagine this swirl of this sea of organisms and particles in the air, at any given time they move. And so it's not remarkable that you can take a sample in the same place 2 times in a row, and they'll be 20%, 30% even different. But what we're looking for, I think, in sampling, the reason we want to do a sampling, and we want to have a hypothesis to do our samplings, and we'll talk about that a little bit, but we want to see what's there so we can evaluate. And we want to see if there's a lot of debris, or is there a lot of one kind of biologic, or does it look like a normal air sample should look, whatever normal is. And that varies through the whole United States and through the time of the year. So it's a whole moving target, but I think as the discussion today is focused on narrowing down the variables that we can control, how to properly deploy these devices, how to record them, and how to send them in. And that's really critical. So let's take a look at a detail of a sampler. Impactor samples have a orifice where the air is input and output. And you can see this one's set up. Naturally, this would be the air intake, and here is hooked up to the pump where it's going to draw it through. Yeah. And so in the middle of that, if we open one of these up, a lot of people don't know what these look like inside. If we open one up, we see that there's a tiny cover slip. And there's the air intake. And this tiny cover slip is got a sticky material on it. And it's very tacky. And as it comes in and the air flows over it, the idea is that the particles will deposit out onto the slide, and then of course the lab will take this, open them up, put it on a glass slide, and analyze it under the microscope. No matter what kind of an air sample it is, whether it's a Z5, a Micro 5, Allergenco, aerosol, they all have the same principle. Sticky surface, a clear sticky surface, and it's important, and they're well aware of this, and they do a good job of it, that the sticky surface has a refractive index the same as glass. In other words, it's transparent to glass, so that when you look at it down the microscope, you don't see any background. You only see the spores.
And all air samples are analyzed with a microscope that have this plate.
Yes. In order to see the fungi, everything is analyzed. Everything we see here is analyzed with the microscope, except, of course, the allergens.
That's different.
And that's different. I want to bring attention to one thing, too, about these cassettes, is they all have serial numbers. The serial number is unique. And you want to make sure that that serial number is recorded on your chain of custody. And an important thing, I think, about doing these samples, just good lab technique, you want to make sure that you record the serial number and the location before you deploy the sample. Because if you take the sample first and then you try to write down the serial number and the location, you're going to get distracted. It's not going to be right. It's always good technique to write it down as you have it in your hand before you deploy it. That way you can put it away and not think about it. If you get into that habit, you won't make as many mistakes. Always check the serial numbers to make sure you haven't transposed the numbers, because I know labs get a lot of the serial numbers and they'll have transposed numbers. And then, of course, because it's a legal document, what do? Do we correct it? Generally, if it's that small of a thing, we'll correct it, we'll sign it, and then we'll run it through, and then notify the client that we've changed it. So serial number is important. Then, of course, a lot of people will label the cassettes accordingly to 1, 2, 3, or 4. So if you want to do that, you can. They'll also locate the area that they're going to take a sample in, for instance, the outside, and they'll write outside sample on this and outside sample on the chain of custody with the serial number, and that just helps the lab and the inspector to know where they took the sample. Because reconstructing your sampling is a hard thing to do, as you well know. Our memories aren't that good, and we'll get home, we'll do two or three jobs that day, and we'll not quite remember where that sample was taken. So always take your time on the samples and record them properly. There's another air sample, and it's often taken with an asbestos cassette, and this is a filter type sample, and it's got a porous membrane, a filter here, and the idea is that you put it in your pump and it's 100% efficient. Unlike all of these, which are quite a bit less than 100% efficient, this is 100% efficient. It captures absolutely everything in the air. So in a way, this is the best sampler, but it has drawbacks in that it's large. There's a large portion that you have to look at. Normally labs will quarter it up and look at a portion of it, and that's perfectly okay. And also there's a concern of when you send this in the mail, they certainly do pop off. Spores will pop off and they'll be lost. But rare spores generally aren't important for interpretations, and so if you've got 1 million of one and you only see 100,000 of them later, it's still a lot. So these are used less commonly than the slit impactors, but some people still use them.
And what is this? What is this called?
Well, this particular one's an asbestos kaolin, but this is just a filter sample.
Filter sample.
And they usually have a mixed ester sample or filter in there, and then it's cleared by acetone, usually acetone vapor, or sometimes triacetone, and analyzed that way. They're a lot more difficult to analyze. Most labs don't like them as much because they're more difficult and they take more time. And most people like the prepared cassettes already.
And once you use one of these by the inspector, you send it into the lab, you're not going to get this back with a new slide.
These are one-off. These are disposable. So what we'll do, of course, is we'll open them up, we'll mount the slide, and we'll keep the cassette with the chain of custody throughout the lab process, so if there's ever a question, then they can always QC. QC is a really important part of any lab process, and you should ensure that your lab's got a good QC program in place. The other thing to mention about these is that they cannot be used again, so don't expect, as you say, don't expect to get these back ever. And make sure, I didn't mention this, but make sure that you read the expiration date. These have an expiration date. This sticky media does not last forever. If you're getting up near the expiration date, you might consider not using it.
They go about a year?
They go about a year. And make sure also that you don't keep these in your dashboard where the heat can get to them, because they are heat sensitive. Don't freeze them. Though they say that the sticky media is good down to minus 15 or so. If you're going to take an outside sample in the winter, I recommend that you put it in your pocket, in your front pocket, and keep it warm until you're about to sample. That's really important, because obviously the harder this media is, the harder it is for the spores to impact on it. So I mentioned a little bit about taking samples but outside, but it's important to keep these environmentally controlled, if you will, so they don't get too cold, they don't get too hot, because you want to control that variable as much as you can. Then, of course, when you finish a sample, whether it be a sample that has a tape or plugs, and nowadays you can't deploy these backwards. They're square and round, so there's no way to mix them up. You want to make sure that you replace the tapes or plugs on them so that they don't get contaminated during shipping. Now, the idea is that these things have a impaction surface, and the spores have to be brought in fairly quickly to impact, but it is possible to contaminate them if you're sloppy about it. So always make sure that you close them back up and send them in. When you send them in, you don't necessarily have to put them in a bag, a pouch. These are secure enough that you can just send them with the plugs in a packet by themselves, and they won't get contaminated. They're very robust, so they don't break very often. But anybody who's taken samples knows that FedEx is sometimes and UPS is not as careful as they should be. They'll get run over, they'll get smashed in a machine. So when we get them and they're smashed, there's nothing we can do about them. You can't reconstruct them. You cannot, because the sampling surface is so small, when these things break, they usually just sinter up, and the media the impaction surface is gone. So we usually can't recover them. And I know that's the consternation of a lot of inspectors when they come broken, because you have to go out sometimes the long ways to resample. But the lab's not in charge of that. We get what we're sent.
What's the most successful kind of package that you've seen come into the lab? Is it a spongy envelope?
A box.
A box.
Yep. FedEx box, UPS boxes are the best, but we don't get that many broken things, but when they do, they're pretty smashed up. Yep. Important to, if you lose these plugs, please don't put Q-tips in here. I've seen people put Q-tips in here, sometimes cotton. What happens, as you can imagine, they'll stick a Q-tip in there and they'll contaminate or break the slide, and then you can't use it. I actually keep track at the lab. We have a wall of shame of all the interesting variables of sampling. Bubble gum probably would work. All right. Anything that's tape or you can wrap them up in Saran wrap. Anything but Q-tips. Yeah. Don't use Q-tips. Okay. Those are impaction samplers designed to sample things that are not alive. Actually, we don't know that they're alive. We don't care, because all you're looking at for these, and this is a quantitative sample, you don't care if the the spores are alive or dead, because you can't tell, and you're just going to count the numbers. And so with the flow rate and time, you will be able to give a quantitative number. So this is what they call a non-viable sampling device.
So you can't identify species of mold.
That's a really good question. Generally, you cannot do that. By and large, you cannot. Do not expect to have a species identification based on a non-viable sampler. Now, if the spore happens to be a monospecific genus, there's only one of them, then you can put a species on it. But it's not very instructive. So don't expect to get a species identification back for this. It's the wrong kind of sample. Now, some people will say, well, gee, can you take this apart and give me a viable sample also? And I say no. This is not designed to do that. I know that Aerocell Zephon has got a viable sampler that can also be used in the air. I don't have a lot of experience with that. My experience has not been very fruitful doing that, and they're not used a lot. It's a good idea, but I think you're better off taking a separate viable and a separate non-viable sample, yeah, because you alleviate all the questions that could come up later when you have to explain, well, what are the variables and how well is that tested and what went wrong. The more things you have to do to a sample to analyze it, the more things that can go wrong, the more things that can be called into question. So my personal feeling is that you should do a viable and a non-viable separately.
And non-viable is quantitative, looking for counts.
Looking for counts.
Yeah.
Counts, and what you're going to get is spores per meter cubed. These non-viable samples, these cassettes, can also be used to take a wall sample. And it's important also, as I do this carefully, to put them in a non-dusty location so that you can put them back on. A lot of people will take them off and they'll put them on the edge of this cassette and then draw it like that, perfectly okay. This cassette can also be used to take a wall sample. And they've got this cowling that fits over there, and you can take a wall sample like this. Sometimes an invasive sample is called for, and this is what they use. So this is a wall sampler device, and we'll detail that later, but it goes right on this, and otherwise the procedure is the same. Important for these, we'll mention again that you don't overload them with debris. Debris is the killer of analysis.
Should the inspector be visually looking to see, their timing the sample and measuring, the amount of air coming in? Is there any value to actually looking at it and watching it to see if a big clump of something just came in?
That's a good question. Remember that the analysis is a microscopic analysis. Therefore, if you can see it, you've got too much. So if you can see your sample in here, you've got orders of magnitude too much. But to answer your question simply, no, you cannot see if you've taken a good sample or not, because there's too much interference with the slit and the orifice, and you don't want to see it anyway, because if you can see it, you certainly have way too much either debris or spores.
You're in the middle of a construction site or right next to somebody cutting grass or something.
Right, and it's going to, as I say, debris is the killer of analysis, because when you've got debris, two things happen. You've got debris that will cover the spores once they've impacted, or you've got debris covering the places for impaction, and either way you're going to lose spores. And so you're going to get either debris too heavy to make an accurate count, in which case the labs will try to estimate, or you'll get too many spores to count. But that's kind of instructive, because you can at least do something with too many spores to count. You'll get an estimate, and those are those always end in the hundreds, thousands to millions.
Yeah.
So if we move on and look at other non-viable sampling techniques, that would include tape samples. Now, tape samples are really interesting, because they are different from the cassettes in that these take things out of the air and are quantitative. Tapes are visual samples. So it's possible to have hidden mold, be able to pick it up with these cassettes, but you would not be able to pick it up with a tape lift. Tape lifts are a visual confirmation of a sample. So this particular device, it comes in a plastic mailer, and it has a label to keep your information. It's got a sticky surface covered by a sterile covering, and it's flexible so that you can take a tape lift, and we'll demonstrate that later. Important to put the cover back on. It's not important to use sterile technique here. You notice I've got my bare hands. None of this is impacted by the fact that we're not sterile. And so this is just a visual, non-viable sample. Now, there is some question about whether you can use a tape lift to do a quantitative sample. In other words, some people will say, well, I want to know how many spores per centimeter squared there are on the wall. Well, I'm not a big fan of that. Some people are. Here are the two ideas. For me, what does it mean to have spores per centimeter squared? Because there are all kinds of different kinds of mold and fungi. Some produce lots and lots of spores, and they are high above the surface. So as you approach the surface to take a sample, you're getting spores actually jumping off the fungus itself onto the tape before you even get to the sample. And so you're going to have lots of things that the big, tall fungus are going to be overwhelming this sampler, and the other things, which may be even more numerous, the small things, are going to be missed. They're going to be minimized. So a sample that says spores per centimeter squared is not that instructive, in my opinion. Better to just see it's a confirmation for a visual sample. Clear tape is also completely acceptable. Be very careful when you do a clear tape that you don't contaminate it, and you can put it on a 1x3 slide and put it in a mailer and send it in, or some people will actually use a bag, a plastic bag, or even a baggie to send it in. And I think in a pinch that's perfectly okay, because I'll just demonstrate really quickly what you want to do. You want to take a sample, and however that's taken, and we can show that in a minute, but then reach onto the inside and put that tape on the inside, and that's a sample that's not going to get contaminated. And you can write the sample number right on here and mail it in. And you can mail it in an envelope.
This already has, room for identification. I even see a barcode and things like that. That's that extra step that, well, just my own personal opinion, I would use this before I go and have a bunch of baggies in my back pocket. And it also is a mailer, right? I mean, it's a little protection device, this little plastic container.
That's correct. It's always preferable to use a manufactured device because of the things you've mentioned. Plus, I know that we use these barcodes and we scan them, and we get the serial number from them and match it with the COC.
Yeah.
And it's just, when you have a manufactured device, it just minimizes the number of things that can go wrong. Even though this is acceptable in a pinch, you can try to avoid those questions that could come up later by using a manufactured device. Really important. So if we move on and look at a carpet sample, carpet samples are a sample that is designed to see what level of spores you've got in a carpet. It's very straightforward, and all of these are straightforward. And these things come with a 4-inch square template, which is placed down on the carpet, and it again is drawn with a pump, and it's got I believe they're polycarbonate filters inside, and it's got a tapered inlet. It goes onto the pump. Now, flow rate here is not important. All of these have carefully controlled flow rates, which we'll detail in a minute. But flow rate's not important in here, because all you want to do is vacuum a 4 square inch with getting enough spores and debris so that it can tell you what is in that 4 square inch. Now, when you do this 4 square inch, you're going to get spores per square inch or spores per square foot, depending on how you want it reported. And so in that way, it's different than the tape devices, in that you're going to get, this is a quantitative sampler. A lot of people don't use it that way. A lot of people want to know, do I have a lot of one thing? Because we had a contamination, we cleaned the carpets, do we have a lot of one thing? And certainly it can tell you that. Okay. These are very difficult to analyze. They take a long time, but they're useful because they can give you a history of the house or the building. And we will detail these more after we finish our little overview here and talk about some more pros and cons. There is another sampling device, and they are meant to be used with glass slides, 1x3 glass slides. You can see the sticky surface on there, and these are meant to go into the device and draw a sample. Then they label the slide, they go back into the mailer, and they are a slit sampler, just the same principles as these. And then you can label this, mail it in with the flow rate and time, as well as on your chain of custody. And these are very durable. They don't break open. But I would just suggest one more thing about these. It's always prudent to tape the top down. Sometimes the top will pop off.
Slide out.
And it can slide out, or it can be contaminated, because you see that this is quite open.
And that goes into a machine.
This goes into a machine.
Unlike this one, which is a pump.
And we will show that at a little later time. But this goes into a device that is calibrated, but it uses a 1x3 slide. And as I say, there's no reason why you'd want to use one slide over the other, one device over the other. other than convenience. Sometimes people like to have, or they get early on, they buy a sampler that takes these slides and they stick with it. All of these have their drawbacks.